Hello and welcome to the Chamber Music Mindset. I am your host, Anna Rathbun, and Happy New Year. Happy 2026. I wish nothing but the best for you this new year. I am recording this on Wednesday, January 7th, just before noon. So who knows how the markets will move, but just to timestamp it. We want to talk about some of the market events and some of the developments that have moved the markets, as well as Venezuela. I do want to talk about it. I wanted to do it Monday, but the days got away from me. So here we go. And here is your usual disclaimer that everything in this video is for information purposes only, education purposes only, and it is not investment advice. And everything's my opinion. All right, let's get started. Market update. We are charging ahead. The year sort of started a little bit shaky on January 2nd on Friday. That was the first day of trading. Not very much in volume. It's really this week that we are actually seeing everyone return to work and everyone just up and about. And we've been doing nothing but going up. And that has been good news to some people who really like to see markets go up, but also it makes certain people nervous because the valuation was already so stretched. But that's what the market does. The market doesn't really care about your feelings. It just kind of does what it does. And right now, what we have is a momentum driven market. We've had some interesting news just in the last few days. You know about Venezuela if you've been paying attention to the news. We also had a data release of ISM manufacturing index, and that did not come out on a happy note. Everything pretty much is in contraction mode in American manufacturing. This is, of course, like at a high level, right? If you have a manufacturing company and you're doing well, that's really wonderful. But that is not what it seems like across the board in the United States. We also received this morning ADP report. Remember, this is the private employment report, the trends that ADP is seeing in terms of payroll, and that came in lower than expected. Remember, last month it was actually negative. So it looks like we've lost more jobs than we gained. This month, would be really December numbers, it's coming in. It came in at about 41,000 jobs gained, and we were expecting just under 50,000. So we missed the expectations. And frankly, we love to see those numbers in the six figures. So when it's in the five figures, it already feels a little bit weak, but it's been trending in that low range for a really long time. And sometimes we're actually losing more jobs than gaining. So this makes a lot of people nervous. On Friday, we get the jobs report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the first jobs report that it's official, and we've got the full data because the government was open the entire month of December. So a lot of people are anticipating and waiting for that data set. And I don't know, come back online Friday to sort of follow up to this video. Okay. So it is a momentum-driven market. The other thing that's happening this week in Las Vegas is CES. It's the Consumer Electronics Symposium, and everyone and anyone who is interested in the tech world, and right now it's pretty much nothing but AI. Everyone wants to do AI because that is sort of the road to future. Jensen Huang is there. All the, who is who, all these people are there. And so that is also creating a lot of excitement in tech, and it's actually driving up a lot of the tech valuations this week. I don't know how much of this is real and how much of this is a little bit of a euphoria from seeing all the different types of unveiling in Las Vegas. We'll see. But I do think that there's more room to run in AI, not without volatility. I mean, valuations are stretched. Everyone talks about this, right? And I agree. The market is very, very expensive. But admittedly, we've never had AI before, so it's difficult to even call what a fair price would be. We just know that it's expensive compared to history. So, I wouldn't think that we're just going to charge through without any volatility, which is really the cost of investing in equity. Okay, that's the market update. We'll see what happens for the rest of the week. I want to talk about the Venezuela impact. So Saturday morning, I woke up and boom, here it is. What happened? And since then, we've learned a lot about what is happening in Venezuela and US's involvement in it. I'm not going to rehash the news because that's not what this video is really about. What I do want to talk about is what this video is about, which is economics and markets and investing. So what is interesting is, whenever these world events happen, a lot of people think that everyone's going to get scared and everyone is going to get nervous and run for the hills. In fact, I think I saw a headline Sunday evening saying that we don't know how the markets will open on Monday morning because of the developments in Venezuela. And what ended up happening was nothing happened. If anything, energy companies like Chevron, Exxon, all these crude oil extracting companies, they were soaring because the markets really viewed this as an opportunity for these companies to go in and start to extract more oil from the Venezuelan oil reserves, which are, by the way, proven. We know it's there. And so there was a lot of excitement around these energy companies. And frankly, that's a reaction to the news. Okay. So the markets did nothing but go up on Monday. So I'm going to use that as an example to point out the fact that if you think the markets are going to act a certain way based on your own fears and your own emotions and how you feel about the world, I've been in this business a long time. You can be wrong. And a lot of investors who may make a bet from that perspective could be wrong time and time again, because what the market does in the wisdom of the masses is that it looks for opportunities as well. Okay, so that's what the market did. Energy company stocks went up because there was an opportunity. Okay, so that I do want to point that out. Oil didn't really move much until last night when President Trump came out and said that, Venezuela and US have an agreement for a certain amount of oil, and that means that there would be more supply in the next coming year. So oil prices went down. But the thing is, the the oil supply isn't like greater by millions of barrels per day today. Like, this is not a 2026 story. It takes a long time for you to go from what was around, I think, 800,000 barrels per day being extracted from Venezuela to whatever Venezuela has the capacity to do. It's not an overnight story. It is not a 2026 story. Even if like it was a smooth sailing for these companies to go in and start extracting, they have to build the infrastructure. They have to work with the local. It is a complex thing. So a lot of this is just reaction to the news. And sometimes that's what happens in the markets. Okay. So there was a little bit of, movement, but nothing significant. And it was definitely isolated to the sectors that would be directly impacted by oil. And the other thing is, a lot of people are worried about the US's standing in the world. And I will tell you that from the financial markets perspective, over the weekend and into Monday, there wasn't that much that moved. And what am I looking at? I'm looking at the value of the US dollar compared to the other currencies out there. So, if you want to look this up yourself on Yahoo Finance or something, the ticker is DXY. It didn't really move much, compared to how much the dollar actually fluctuates in history. And also the bond yields didn't move that much. Like, there wasn't this huge, run up in price because everyone is running toward the hills. There wasn't any of that. Or selling of US treasuries because suddenly US is, terrible. Like, you didn't see much of it at all. And so that tells you that the world also kind of, beyond the rhetoric, right? The world kind of shook this off as a non-event. Okay, so what is going on, right? And I'm actually going to stop the video here and start a fresh one. So wait just like 2 seconds. Okay, what gives? This is a much longer play, and this is sort of my reaction to the news and the subsequent news that came out about, making a deal with Venezuela to extract more oil. I think President Trump is talking to different oil companies to talk about going into Venezuela. And this morning, it came out that the US military seized two oil tankers that may be in violation of the existing sanctions. So I'm going to get into this a little bit, and it's why I started a new video because I knew it was going to get long. So this event, it was not a tradable event. Like I said, some of the price movements that we saw in various assets, they were a reaction. This is more of a long term, one of those tectonic shifting type of a move. Okay. And why do I think that? Look, we're dealing with oil, which is something that everyone needs. As much as we have made progress in, renewable energy, etc., nothing replaces oil. Everyone still needs oil. In Venezuela, under the old regime, Maduro's regime, they had a lot of relationships that U.S. considered not very friendly. So we know that China was buying oil from Venezuela, and there was a lot of moving around of crude oil in the dark of the night on the ocean. Okay, so we know that, and I don't have like concrete information on this in terms of the actual numbers, but there are fleets that are out there in the ocean, these tankers that actually are running around with oil. How do we know that? It became very evident in 2020. Remember when coronavirus shut everything down and nobody was using oil, and oil prices actually fell below zero? You're like, how can that happen? Well, it fell below zero because it's like if I'm selling you oil, I'm going to pay you to take it because it's costing me to store it. So, in order to get you to take it, I have to pay you so that you have money for storage. But then we were also running out of storage spaces. So, a lot of the oil were just sitting around on the ocean on these tankers completely full, not knowing where to go. So, they still exist. And sometimes it's not a very highly, regulated type of ship movements. Okay, I'll just put it at that level. So it's sometimes there are materials that are sanctioned that are still being traded. So apparently there was a seizure of two ships this morning as of 11:30 this morning. That's what we know. Okay, what's going on? Think about where we have uh, conflicts around the world that the U.S. is involved in. Russia, Ukraine. Remember, Russia is a gigantic gas station, right? Russia actually has a lot of oil, and they were trying to sell it. One of the things that we did when Russia invaded Ukraine was to put sanctions on their oil sales. So there's a lot of glut that was there. China, they're still developing. They still want to build, build, build. They want a lot of oil. They desire a lot of oil. So when the U.S. put sanctions on oil on Russia, China became a buyer. So their relationship became even thicker than it was before. And then think about the Middle East, right? There's a lot going on in the Middle East in terms of U.S. involvement. And we all know the story of the Middle East and oil, right? And especially Iran. So if they all have sort of a common theme here, it's oil, right? So it means a huge thing for the US to sort of seize the control of Venezuelan oil because it is a very big depository. So now you have China saying, oh, I don't know. I mean, where are we going to get the oil? I mean, there's a lot of oil still. It's not a today problem, but it sort of changes the dynamic of power. Okay, so that is sort of how I'm looking at this entire thing. Is President Trump isn't kidding when he says this is about oil, because I think it is the truth. I think it is about oil, but a little bit deeper, it really is about this chess game that we are playing with the other nations. So that's that. Um, there is a little bit of what I think maybe a little retaliatory from China, which is that this morning it came out that China just advised its companies to halt the H200 chip orders from NVIDIA. Okay. Everyone is looking at the China US trade slash tariff talk in the next months. um, this oil control by the US, it completely changes the dynamics in my mind because China needs oil. We need rare earth minerals. Actually, I think in this game of like who has more to give and who has the upper hand, I think US gained a lot from that respect. So it's going to be very interesting. So this is China saying, well, I mean, okay, you have oil, I have rare earth minerals. If you're expecting me to buy more chips from NVIDIA because you have more control of oil, maybe that's not the message I want to be sending you. That is how I'm taking it. I'm sure other people have other interpretations. We'll see. This reminds me of, so I went to college in the late 90s, um, basically telling you my age. um, and, we studied game theory a lot because if you think about what was happening in the 90s, we had just come out of, Berlin Wall falling. I remember watching that in the United States as a relatively new immigrant, having lived in Korea with North Korea breathing down our neck and there still being some tension, and feeling it as a kid. I remember thinking, wow, we're really entering a different world. I remember thinking that watching TV, and Soviet Union falling, etc. So, we were sort of exiting the Cold War. And those of us who had lived through the Cold War, it was very fresh in our minds. So we were studying a lot of game theory, right? I feel like we're playing game theory, the games that game theory classes talked about, but on a different level. It's really not about, I hope it's not about nuclear power, but it's about resources. It's a economic resources, natural resources. I think it's totally different, and technology, right? Um, and the last thing I will say about Venezuela is like there's a lot of news, there's a lot of analysis, myself included, but the truth is that we don't really know the discussions that took place and the goals of, these actions. We don't really know. And we don't really have to know because it's going to happen. In fact, it probably is in the best interest of the United States to keep those things classified. And many years later, I'm sure it'll become declassified. Um, and so I think from my perspective, there's a little bit of a humble humility pill. Like I will operate looking at these things. I will look at the markets and the movements and all of that. But I will always operate with the assumption that I can't know everything about what is actually happening, that it is kept from me for good reasons. You might think that I'm putting way too much faith in the government, but what am I going to do? Like knock on the door of the White House? Let me in, let me be in the briefings, or let me be a fly in the wall. There are just things that we're not going to know, at least now, right? So there needs to be a dose of humility in terms of the information that is available to us. So this is all opinion, this is all conjecture, and I would think that most of what we hear in the news is of the same kind. Okay. One of the things that's happening because of all of these world events, and frankly, these are relatively new, as in if you are a very young person, you probably have not seen the world in this kind of a disarray. It feels like it is getting a little bit messier, right? If you are older, you might feel like some of the tensions that existed in the past have returned. And these things can cause a lot of anxiety. Okay. And especially if you read the headlines, depending on what your news source is, it can cause a lot of anxiety. So this is my recommendation, is to please try to ignore the noise. I just told you in this video how the markets reacted to it by going up. Okay. Um, And there is wisdom in the masses, okay? And it's basically telling you the direct impact where it is, and it really is in energy, and it is in oil and commodity prices. It's, how that impacts my daily life, my job, all of these things. It's like, that degree of separation thing that everyone talks about. It might be like 50 degrees of separation. If you can't work out the mechanics of how it will impact your life, whether it be positive or negative, worrying is, there's no end to it. And I wouldn't recommend it. It's not good for your health, right? And that's sort of how I keep saying when these things happen. Since the pandemic, it has been nonstop news for people in my profession. That makes the world more interesting to analyze, but underneath it, it can make people nervous. So I hope you sleep well. Try not to worry. And yeah, I mean, try to ignore the noise as best you can. I hope this is helpful. And I want to wish you a happy new year, 2026. Whatever your endeavors may be, I wish you great success. And I hope you keep tuning in for more news and analysis. Happy New Year.